Hello, heroes, and welcome to our next Heroes podcast, where we speak to inspiring women across many different fields, from business to sports to charity, fashion, and many others. We learn about their journeys to achieve all of the great things that they have, and also talk about the support network of other heroes that inspire them as well. So I'd just like to say hello to Naomi Schiff of W-Series Racing, who is the star of today's show.
Hello, Katie. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Thank you. And thank you so much for agreeing to do it. I found out ashamedly about W Series only for the first time when I went to watch my first Grand Prix back in July. Blistering hot day, and took solace in the W Series hospitality tent in the pockets of shade that you had.
Yeah, there wasn't much shade on that day. Absolutely. I remember it was scorching hot. I was even trying to shade myself.
So hot, everybody walking around with umbrellas to try and keep cool. And I actually heard you and Catherine, who's obviously the CEO of W Series, speak in the W Series hospitality tent, and was really, really impressed with the snippets of the story about why W Series was formed that I heard. So wanted to learn more, essentially, which is why I reached out. So thank you very much for letting me and my listeners learn more about you and the great work that you do.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think that there's no shame in only having found out about W Series this year. It's only our second season, actually, considering we didn't race last year. So we are definitely still in our infancy. So it's quite normal that people are only just starting to find out about us, but it's great. It's great that you now know about us.
Yes, exactly. And from what I've heard, it's going to get huge. So should we start off with that? Do you want to give us a bit of background before we talk about your specific role, but W Series itself?
Absolutely. I mean, well, first of all, I hope, what we're trying to do is to build the biggest female sport in the world. So fingers crossed that that's where this journey takes us. But to give everybody who's listening an idea as to what W Series is, it's the first women's only motor racing championship with single-seater cars in the world. Traditionally, motorsport has always been a sport where women and men can compete equally with one another, which it still is. And therefore, there was a little bit of controversy around the topic of W Series when we first launched.
Okay.
Because people obviously saw it as segregation rather than, what we're actually truly trying to do. Which is raising the number of women in the sport, because, as I mentioned, traditionally motorsports, women and men can race together. But if you look at most championships and most paddocks, you'll see that it's mostly men.
Yeah.
It has always been a male-dominated industry and a male-dominated sport. So W Series basically exists to raise awareness about the topic, to give women opportunities, and also to create role models for younger generations.
Yeah.
So that's basically W Series in a nutshell. It's a free-to-enter championship for drivers, which is a huge benefit, because most people will know that motorsports is an incredibly expensive sport. And that's the defining element of whether a racing driver, female or male, is successful in their career. So that definitely takes away a huge burden from drivers.
Yes, definitely. And I loved that one. I heard you speak about that at the Grand Prix back in July, you and Catherine, because that's an intersectionality that I'm quite passionate about. So class, whatever you want to call it, but kind of funds, your point of lack of access to funds. It doesn't matter if you don't have the funds to enter into motorsport, and how gender and that intersect. So I'm really pleased that you're kind of tackling both areas of diversity there. It's really pleasing to see.
Yeah, well, I mean, we saw it, in the numbers that, young girls were entering in karting, not in big numbers, but the ones that were making it out of karting were going into levels like Formula 4, and then never really making it past that level, very seldom. And most of the time it came down to finances and having lacks of opportunities and sponsors not really believing in female talent, because there just hasn't been very many females in the sport. So, we're trying to close that hole in the pyramid where women seem to be funneling out. Yeah.
Have you noticed, I know you said you've only been going for 2 years, but a marked improvement potentially in people interested in W Series, or just women in motorsport generally? Has there been any kind of reflection on whether or not your mission is feeding through down to people wanting to get involved in motorsport as women?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was not there when W Series was created. I came on board in the first year as a driver. So my experience in the first year was racing in W Series. Mm-hmm. But from what my understanding is of where they started and where they ended the first year, I don't think anybody within the business expected the results that they had. We ended up being the second most watched female sport in the UK in 2019. We now have more females with racing licenses in single-seater cars than at any point in history before. Mm-hmm. One of our drivers, Jamie Chadwick, became a Williams reserve driver. So there were lots of little milestones that were massive and really important for us to be able to continue to tell our story and to continue to build this platform. But yes, it has been. We also have, unfortunately, we missed 2020 as a season, but we did sign a partnership with Formula One, which is incredible, to be partnering with basically the biggest platform in motorsports.
Such a big achievement.
Just goes to show that they respect what we're doing and, they're backing us in terms of, allowing us to race on their platform and backing our concept. So that in itself is a huge achievement. So many little things like that. The FIA, which is our basically our sporting body, government, they have awarded us super license points, which is points that not every championship has been awarded, and points necessary for drivers who want to reach Formula One need to have a certain amount of super license points. So that means that we are now as well officially a platform for women to get to Formula One as well.
Oh, amazing.
So many little milestones, more mechanics. We've got more female mechanics and engineers in our team this year than we had in year one. So yeah, we're definitely, we still have a long way to go, but, we're seeing results. So it's great.
Yeah, making very, very strong headway. Yeah, well done. That's really good to hear.
I mean, look, I think there's a huge team of people back in the office in Victoria who deserve the well done. I don't think I've contributed too much to all of that. But yeah, it's impressive what they've been capable of doing.
A team effort, I'm sure. Looking forward to hearing more about it. And on that point, let's hear more about you. So tell us about you, Naomi, please, and what you do in W Series as well, please.
Well, so as I mentioned, when I first got involved with W Series, it was purely as a driver. Mm-hmm. We went through quite a vigorous selection phase, given that it was year one and there were so many entries from across the world of women interested to be a part of W Series. Mm-hmm. And I was one of the top 18 who qualified to be in the cars for year one.
Well done.
Thank you very much. One of my proudest achievements, definitely. That was an amazing experience in itself. And I also saw that, even from the perspective of sponsors, having our own platform, I had more interest from sponsors than I'd had previously. So I always thought that, I always wanted to race against men, but I realized that the odds of me having a successful career were not great. Mm-hmm. Because I struggled to have opportunities and sponsors on board and all of that stuff, whereas W Series was giving us those opportunities. Okay. So after year one, I was working for another company at the time, and year one was really difficult for me because I was working as a team manager for a racing team, mm-hmm. championship, so juggling that and racing in W Series, and I was also stunt driving on some movies. It was really
cool.
It was a really hectic year, and I think at the end of the year I realized that I almost had started dreaming again. I think I had parked my dreams for a long time, and W Series almost reignited my dreams. And I thought, okay, at the time I was 24 going on 25, and I just thought to myself, okay, there's still a lot of time left, and I mm-hmm. shouldn't stay where I am and be stagnant in my career and in my life. So then I basically had spoken to Sean, who's our chairman at W Series. He was interested in having me on board in the team in Victoria. So yeah, I packed my bags up from where I was living, moved to London and joined the W Series team as an employee and a colleague. which was definitely an interesting experience, going from having been a driver to being in the office. It was interesting, but everybody is so lovely at W Series, so I really have enjoyed my time with them. And yeah, so I was mostly working as diversity and inclusion ambassador, but I was also working in the partnerships team. And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, due to COVID, a lot of the stuff that we had in the pipeline, because I moved to London in December 2019, and obviously we went into our first lockdown in March, April.
Yes, not ideal timing.
Yeah, really, really, really not ideal. So a lot of the stuff that we had in the pipeline and ideas that we had been brainstorming on and building had to be put aside for the time being. And I think a lot of things within the business had to be put aside in 2020. So that wasn't so much the focus, and we were just trying to get money on board to be able to put together a championship in 2021, which we've been able to do. So yeah, the role's been constantly, changing and challenging due to the pandemic as well. But yeah, now 2021, I've yet again adapted my role, and I'm working as a presenter, as well as still doing like my ambassadorial duties, and still working on this diversity and inclusion part, which is an everyday task, really.
Yeah, well, that's so interesting. Yeah, as you say, it's sometimes, I want to say, it's sad to hear sometimes when you said when you were 24 or 25, you thought that you couldn't pivot your career or you couldn't make it in what you wanted to do, and then W Series gave you the opportunity to kind of pursue your passion in such. So that's really good to hear, because I think that continues, and as you say, your role has changed there even since you've joined. So I think as people go through their careers, you're always going to learn new things that you're passionate about and be given opportunities and things in certain areas. I think that will take you in different directions, but exciting ones, it sounds like. So well done. So you touched on the pandemic then. Clearly you moved to London just before the pandemic and started at W Series as well. So this community was originally set up because I realised quite early on in the pandemic how much I missed strong female companionship in person, and how much I hadn't appreciated in the past, just kind of the organic conversations you have with other women, be that work colleagues or face-to-face conversations with your parents or friends, or just sitting in silence with other women and kind of feeling supported. So that's why this community, the HER.oes community, was set up. So could you talk to us a bit about what your coping mechanisms during the pandemic were, during lockdown, what helps you thrive? And that could be both from a professional and personal perspective, please.
Yeah, well, I think I've lived in so many different countries in the last 27 years of my life, and I found that chasing your dreams often leads to a little bit of loneliness. And when I moved to London, I was just starting to shape my life, my new life here in London, and that very quickly came to an end. So I didn't really have too many friends or anything around me. So it was definitely about to be a very lonely period. But I think I was ready for that because I had been through those moments before to some extent.
Yeah.
This was definitely a next level on that.
It's not just not having someone to go out with on a Saturday night. It's
no, exactly. It's like absolutely not having any contact with people. But I live in a new development, and on my floor there's 3 apartments, and I was really lucky that there were 2 brothers who lived in the apartment next door to me, and they were around my age group. So we almost acted as a one household, because we basically came in contact with no one other than each other. And we have a public terrace just outside my flat where we would do yoga or training, all these things.
Yeah.
Luckily I had them, but then again, it's like all of a sudden you find yourself spending a lot of time with people, which was like the opposite end of that. As much as they were great, I also didn't feel the need to see them all the time every day.
Yeah.
So it was really a balancing act. I had a lot of FaceTime calls with my girlfriends. One in particular who lived in Germany. Her and I really were like each other's phone buddies for the entire the entire lockdown period. We called each other at least once a day, probably. But yeah, I think, that didn't last too long, because W Series, obviously, they canceled their racing season. But one thing I think racing drivers can be really lucky to say is that we can do our sport from home. So I have, if you're not seeing this, I have a racing simulator in my living room, and at the series set up their esports league, which was an absolute blessing in disguise. One, it kept our talent, it kept us sharp in terms of training, but also it was so social. It was like the first real social interaction that I had in ages, and I'm sure all the drivers felt the same way.
So it all links up, I guess, between the simulators that everybody had.
Yeah, so they actually managed to get a hardware partner, Logitech, who actually distributed exactly the same equipment to everyone across the world. So there were 20 drivers in the esports league, and whether you were in Brazil or Japan or me in London, everybody had the same equipment, the same webcam, the same everything. So we were all having the exact same experience. And struggling with our internet.
Yeah, but that takes up a lot of bandwidth.
Absolutely. But there's also a platform where when gamers, game, or when you're racing online, you connect on, I should really remember what it's called, but in any case, it's basically like all being on one call together, which ended up being quite distracting in racing, but it also meant that we were having a lot of fun and chatting, and it lasted for 10 weeks. So we had one race every week for 10 weeks. And that involved a lot of training during the week. So there's a couple of drivers I'm closer to, and we would organize practice sessions together, and then we would get online and chat and make jokes. And so that definitely was probably the highlight of the lockdown period. And also, again, one of those things where initially in the lockdown period, I sort of felt like, okay, this is not too bad. Life has been so busy and so hectic. Maybe this is a great time to take a couple of steps back and just, reflect on things and put things into perspective and all of that stuff. And that was great. And that positivity lasted about 3 weeks. And then,
at least you had it.
Yeah. And then you get hit with reality, and it was hard. I think I felt like I was a little bit on a roller coaster, but small things like that, and having friends and, chatting to people, and just holding on to a little bit of hope and planning, and making sure I spent a little bit of time every day working towards something I was passionate about. Those were the things that really helped me to survive.
Kept you going. No, it's interesting what you said about the kind of time to reflect, and lots of people felt guilty. I want to say me being one of them, but that would be a lie. If they weren't really productive every day. I always said whenever we had calls at work or with my friends, it's okay to just a weekend, obviously we haven't got anywhere to go, to sit there in your pajamas and just watch Netflix if you want. You don't have to be learning how to do jiu-jitsu or knitting or something. Fair play if you want to do that, but it doesn't make you a bad person if you don't. Take the time to relax. You realize now we've gone back to normal how fast-paced life is. Absolutely. I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older, but I can't, if I go into the office on one day, I'm wiped out for the next few, and that's just getting on a train and going and having to talk to people in person. So I think
absolutely. I think we appreciate work-life balance a little bit more a lot now than we did before, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. And how flexible you can be as well. And then just to touch on, clearly you mentioned how W Series pivoted to esport and kind of provided you with the means to do that. Clearly motorsport is predominantly a in-person thing you have to do. It's not something that you can do over a Zoom call. What else did W Series do to kind of support everybody that worked there, or initiatives, or what else kind of kept them going through the pandemic?
Well, one thing we didn't have, and we're quite a small team. W Series on the outside looks really big, but if you look at the office, I think at the time when the pandemic hit, there was probably 14 people in the office, and maybe 17. I don't know the exact numbers, but we were quite a small team, and we were always, for the short time that I was working in the office, everyone was always in. So there was no need for company town halls, for example, which is what ended up being set up. So we had a 1-month call where there was an overview of what's going on in the business, updates on, for example, the partnership that we now have with Formula One and for 2021. So we weren't kept in the dark. They were constantly once a month we had our call where we were updated on what was going on. And then we also had some really fun things that we did, pop quizzes.
Yeah.
My team actually, my team, as well as some of the other teams, when we were part of basically setting up the esports league. And so we put together a quiz on esports. So before we launched the esports league, we did a whole quiz that everybody was up to date with what was going on, but we did it in a fun way. So, that was lovely. They definitely just, connected, but also informed at the same time.
Yeah, good to hear. Thank you.
No
then
worries.
If we go back to pre-pandemic, so you touched on kind of your journey in the years before that took you to taking the role as diversity inclusion lead, and now obviously W Series TV as well. Was there an inciting moment that made you want to pursue a career in motorsport? And yeah, what was that thinking that made you want to do that, if you can remember? Because it sounds from what you've said, it's always been kind of a lifelong passion.
Yeah, I mean, look, it would be really difficult for me to pinpoint the exact moment. To be honest, when I first experienced my first drive in a go-kart, I was 11, and I was invited to an indoor go-karting birthday party. And when I arrived there that day, I was completely oblivious to the sport. I mean, I knew my dad watched Formula One, and every now and again I would look at it with him, but I didn't get it. I didn't get the rules. I didn't understand why they kept driving in circles. I didn't understand what was interesting about it. I just wasn't my thing. But then I got there on that day, got in a kart, and I actually really enjoyed the actual driving itself. So yeah, when that day ended, I basically begged my dad for a long time to take me back, and eventually he did. And we started going back a couple of times, and I think because of the fact that I was 11, he almost assumed that it was a phase, which rightly so he should. And so he bought himself a go-kart, but not me. But I still, tagged along with him. And the fact that I continued to show the same level of interest towards the sport, he eventually realized that it wasn't a phase. And so he bought me my own go-kart. And obviously I'm forever grateful to him for having supported it, because if he didn't, or if he just said, stay in school, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm forever grateful. But yeah, to get to your question, I think, that was the beginning of what I didn't realize was going to be an entire career. And a year after I started, basically a year after that indoor go-karting birthday party, so when I was about 12, I was entered into my first race. And I drove in the club championship, which is quite a low level, but it's like an entry-level championship. Won the championship, and in year 2, I decided to go to regional levels as well as levels. So my dad threw me in the deep end with that, but it was the best decision, because I ended up finishing second in the South African Championship, which automatically qualified me for Team South Africa in the World Championships. So things really snowballed quite quickly, and I don't think that there was one specific moment where I was like, this is going to be a career path. I think I just realized at some point, like, okay, this is happening. It wasn't like I had made a decision. It just happened. It just happened, and I was in it. And then at some point I realized, and I realize it now as well, that like, it's a huge part of my identity. Like when I left school, I was thinking to myself, okay, I need to go to university, but what will I do? Like, there's nothing else I want to do in my life other than, or be involved in motorsport. So that just sort of happened. It was definitely a passion. And so I think I've always attempted to do anything I can to stay within motorsports. Yeah. Hence our presenter.
It's so good to hear, because you don't often hear people that are doing something kind of in their 20s, like kind of the first few decades of their careers, that they actually decided, maybe subconsciously, that they wanted to do when they were 11. I had no idea. I think I used to say I was the most serious little girl, my dad always says, but I learned how to use the female version of all of the professions, and I worked out that people were called comedians, but I wanted to be a comedian, which they always say they found hilarious, because I was the most serious little girl. But because I knew how to use the female version of this profession, that's all I said I wanted to be. now I'm a management consultant, so he's been proven right there.
Well, maybe you should get a try at being a comedian.
Maybe I should. Yeah. Who knows? It's never too late.
In the deep end. You never know what's going to happen.
I hope they like why I did the chicken cross the road jokes. I probably don't even have. And one of the reasons I asked that question around the inciting moment about kind of why you pursued a career in motorsport. So you've got a really unique role. Like obviously W Series is an organization trying to support women in sport, generally motorsport, support women, and you're the diversity and inclusion lead. Clearly, lots of people, and I'm generalizing, would associate motorsport with toxic masculinity sometimes, and it just being something for boys. Clearly, I don't agree with that. You don't agree with that. But what kind of challenges have you come up against, if any, because of that viewpoint of some, or maybe not even the viewpoint, but just the historical fact that there's always jokes about women drivers, and it being quite a male-dominated sport anyway?
Well, I think generally that's really the issue there. It's the perception around female driving, and obviously, given that perception, which has been, a thing for so long, even when, for example, my dad was a racing driver, but he only had 2 daughters. So I don't think he ever assumed that we would be interested in motorsports. It was never a sport that he introduced me to or anything to that extent. And I was just lucky that I fell into it. But once I showed my interest, he was like, oh, okay, like there's an opportunity to still do the sport I'm passionate about with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of parents and a lot of fathers and society in general just don't see motorsport as a sport for women. So our issue is that there's very few women entering the sport at low levels. Like young girls aren't entering the sport at the same, in an equal part to the amount of men or young boys that are entering the sport. So, you're fighting with a talent pool of men that's much, 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 much bigger than the talent pool of women.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in itself is the biggest issue. And then, then you've got to question yourself, okay, you've got this huge talent pool of men and you've got this very small talent pool of women. Like, what are the odds that one of those women are good enough to compete against the best possible man in a much bigger talent pool?
Mm-hmm.
And those numbers are really what's against us, because women aren't getting through. There aren't enough women in the sport for people to take us seriously. And it's just basically like, again, a snowball effect. It's not one thing that's an issue. It's basically the whole perception and the fact that, women aren't entering the sport as much as men. So, it's a vicious cycle. Teams don't really pick female drivers. Most of them have male drivers. Sponsors don't necessarily invest as much money into women as they do into men. And then women aren't driving. So, yeah, I think in general, we have to work twice as hard to be taken seriously in the sport because of the perception around female drivers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, hopefully, as you say, you talk about a snowball effect. Hopefully that gets
reversed.
Seems quicker and quicker, like kind of, like in a positive way. I say, well, if you start at the grassroots and it's about getting more kind of young girls into the sport and interested in it and not being exposed to those kind of viewpoints, that will hopefully help reverse that, definitely.
Well, actually, on that note, I think if you ask me about the enticing moment, obviously my role has changed quite a lot, and I will always be a racing driver at heart, and I'll always want to have a steering wheel in my hands, but I'm obviously in a very different role at the moment. And part of the reason why I do what I do, and part of the reason why I wanted to be part of the W Series team in the role I was in, is because I realized that, when I started racing, there weren't any female role models in our sport.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to the track when I was really young, let's say, at the age of 12 when I started, that's a time in your life where you're really socially conscious and you're really
Mm-hmm.
starting to be aware of what people think about you, and you really want to fit in and all of that stuff. So going to the track as a young Black female in a world that was mostly white and male
Mm-hmm.
was intimidating. I mean, my dad is white,
Mm-hmm.
so he definitely fit in, and that helped me a little bit with my confidence, because he always reassured me that I belonged there as much as anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was really the fact that the year that I started racing, Lewis Hamilton went into his first year in Formula One.
Mm-hmm.
He became my role model from that moment on because of what he looked like. He wasn't exactly like me, but he was something like me, and that was already more than what I had. So I realized more and more how important like identifiable role models are. And I remember also, year one, Brands Hatch was quite a big event for us in the UK. And we had like a bunch of girls from London Youth who came and saw the racing. And I think a lot of them gravitated towards me because I was an identifiable role model for them. And so all of a sudden it was like a little bit of a weight had been put on my shoulders, because I realized, you know, I was in a position where I could be that person for some people, even if it's just one young girl or two young girls or whatever the case may be. I wanted to take that seriously. And so even though I'm not in a seat at the moment, I have a reserve driver role, but I'm also presenting because I know that it's a forward-facing role where young girls will see me. And that's, I think, important. It doesn't sound like I'm blowing my smoke, blowing my own trumpet, but...
No, definitely not. You definitely should if you were doing more. No, you're right. It's odd, isn't it, when you do realise that when you're seen as a role model or people look up to you in whatever guise, be that kind of professionally or personally, it is normally because they see something inside themselves that gives them hope about what they might want to do. And that's exactly, it makes it seem like that's real, that's tangible, that could be me. And I want to learn more. So that gave me goosebumps. I'm sure you were really shocked at Brands Hatch when people from London Youth were coming up to you.
Yeah, no, I was. I mean, I was really like it touched me as well, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not really doing anything special at all. But clearly, like, it was enough to inspire them. So I realized I waste that opportunity, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember going back to being in the kind of hospitality area at the W Series at the Grand Prix. Jamie Chadwick actually came out. I got a shameless selfie with her. And there were lots of young girls kind of like chasing after her and getting selfies. And as I said, this was my first exposure to W Series and motorsport generally anyway. So I was kind of bemused as to like, what's this big deal? And like hearing you talk about it and learning more about it, you realise how important it is. And then I saw 3 separate people come in, 3 guys, and again they were swarmed. And I was like, oh, I said to my other half, are they like male racing drivers? I don't recognise them. But they were YouTubers. I didn't know who they were.
I remember that. I gave them a tour of one of our W Series cars, really nice guys.
Yeah.
No, it's nice. People are really starting to show interest, and, you know, our platform is definitely, it's here, you know, we're definitely on the map.
Here to stay, which brings me on to my next question. What's next for you and what's next for W Series?
Well, you know, obviously we've had year 2, we're basically almost at the end of the season. We've had 6 races so far and still have 2 to go. So yeah, basically what's next on the map, going across the pond for the first time, because in year 1 we only raced in Europe. And the first part of our season so far is in Europe, but now our next race is in Austin, Texas. So that's going to be super exciting. Jamie Chadwick and Alice Powell are both on equal points at the head of the championship. So we're going into what's going to be a really interesting final races of the season. So yeah, there's a lot of interest going into that at the moment and planning for that. But also, what's next? What does next season look like? Where will our calendar be? All of that good stuff. So there's plenty of going on, but we're taking it one step at a time. And obviously going to the US is a big step for us. So it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I guess because you said W Series hadn't been around for too long before the pandemic hit, you're going into what the new world looks like and also growing quite a lot as a business. So it'll be exciting to see what you do. I shouldn't say business as a kind of a sporting league. It's not a business. Yeah. But so before we get on to the last question, you've given loads of really great advice, kind of weaved in between how you've answered the questions today. So thank you for that. Is there any one last snippet of advice, and that can be on anything you want, whether it's about how to get into motorsport, how to pivot your career, move into a different country? You've done so much. Is there anything that you would like to share with the listeners of this episode?
I think it's a really difficult one, because there's so many different things to talk about. But from a female perspective in an industry that's very male dominated, I often find that what we're doing, as much as it's important, is also, it ends up being kind of silly, because at the end of the day, it's just a sport. But there's, women working real jobs in like real time that are struggling with very real situations that are very similar. And I think, you know, sports is a great tool to change that perspective, even in office, because that is one place where people find, you know, common ground and in some way. But yeah, I think the most important thing to say is no matter whether it's in sport or in, you know, your business, your workplace, the most important thing to do is to back yourself, you know, believe in yourself, because nobody's going to believe in you like you believe in yourself. And if you stand in your own way, you're not going to get very far. So that's always my piece of advice, is just back yourself, believe in yourself, push yourself to just keep, you know, achieving those goals or reaching those dreams, or whatever the case, whatever you're setting yourself as a target, just keep going and really just never give up.
Yeah, I love that piece of advice. As you say, your best place to do that, to rise yourself up and get to where you want to be, it's not often you hear stories of people not doing that and getting lifted into positions or kind of helped along. You need to show, obviously, that you've got the ambition and do it for yourself. I love that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And then the last question. I
actually have a tattoo on my forearm which says, "Dream as if you'll live forever and live as if today's your last day." So that's very much my little piece of advice that I read whenever I forget what I'm doing.
That's Naomi Schiff's copyright quote.
I believe it's someone else's quote, to be honest, but for now.
Take it. No one else will know. Thank you so much. And then our last question is, this community is the HER.oes community, the HER.oes community, and it's all about supporting other women, and celebrating women, which is exactly what we're doing today with you and all the other great work that W Series are doing too. So in the spirit of celebrating other women, do you have another woman? And it can also be a man, because it can be someone that you think contributes obviously to celebrating women as well, that you would like to give us a bit of background into and tell us why they're your HER.oe or hero.
I think, you know, given my position, it's really difficult to pick one person. My political answer would be, you know, W Series has 18 drivers on the grid, 4 reserve drivers. So 22 amazing female athletes who all need backing, who all need support, who all need more eyes on them, who all need to raise their profiles in order for us to make this sport what we want it to be. If I were to raise awareness about anything, it's the W Series platform, because there's so many women that, you know, are involved in W Series, and they all fall under, you know, some role, whether it be, you know, our social media team, our marketing team. There's so many women in the office. It's incredible. And then there's the 18 drivers on track who are fronting what we're doing. And we need to raise awareness about our athletes so that we can grow our sport. So if anyone's listening to this, I'd say, you know, go and visit the W Series Instagram page and find out who those drivers are and support them, because that's what we need. But if I were to highlight one person, she probably doesn't need too much highlighting, because she's basically the hero at W Series, is Catherine Bonmure. Basically, this entire idea is hers, and none of us would be where we are without her having come up with this great idea. So Catherine Bonmure, I would say, is a very interesting character, lots of fun, the CEO of W Series, and yeah, basically the founder of the whole project. So I would say shout out to Catherine Bonmure.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, definitely. And you answered one of I said that was my last question, but kind of how can people support you? Because other people ask me that as well. Like when you talk about female-owned businesses or businesses that support females or organizations or charities that support females, people are sometimes like, okay, I can know about them, but like, what else do I do? But as you said, kind of familiarize yourself, follow the Instagram page, raise awareness, watch W Series TV. I'm definitely going to do that more. But yeah, just get yourself involved and give exposure to what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's all about numbers. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to money and numbers. And the more followers we have on our Instagram page and the more viewers we have watching our races, the more backing we'll get and the more that this project will remain alive. So yeah, if that's the one thing I can say, is just watch our races.
Yes.
Won't regret it, because it's really entertaining racing.
Yeah, no, I've definitely got the bug after going for the first time in July. Definitely.
Great.
Thank you so much. That's been so insightful to hear more about you and W Series. As I said, I was relatively naive to anything, and I'm still got so much to learn. But I know that the ambition of W Series, and you can tell how passionate you are about it and their mission, is just truly inspiring. And I can't wait to see it grow as an organization and see what you do next for them as well.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's really like, even though, you know, we do this and we're like, it's a passion, it's still, you know, all these interactions are so important for us as women. So I'm also grateful to have had the chance to speak on your platform. And yeah, hopefully this won't be the last time.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.